This is the Untold Hour. Tonight's story is the one they left out of the myth. Everyone knows Pandora opened the jar. They call her curious, careless. The first woman, and already the one who ruined everything for the rest of us. But here's what almost nobody asks. What if she never had a choice to begin with? What if the curiosity wasn't hers at all, but something placed inside her deliberately by hands that built her for exactly this moment? Tonight we go back to the beginning, not her beginning, his. Zeus was angry, not the ordinary kind of anger that passes in a day, the old cold kind, the kind that plans. Prometheus had stolen fire from the gods and given it to mankind, and in doing so, he'd handed humanity something they were never supposed to have: warmth, tools, the ability to shape their own world instead of simply enduring it. Zeus couldn't take the fire back. It was already spreading, already lighting forges and hearths across the earth. So he decided on something else instead. If he couldn't undo the gift, he would balance it with a cost. He called for Hephaestus, god of the forge, the one god skilled enough to shape something that could pass convincingly as one of them. The order Zeus gave him had nothing to do with love or companionship, or any of the reasons a craftsman usually shapes a figure with careful hands. "Build me a woman," he said, "not for joy, not for anyone's happiness, least of all her own. Build me something beautiful enough that no one, not even her, will ever suspect what she's carrying inside her." Picture the forge that night. Picture Hephaestus alone at his workbench, firelight moving across the walls, his hands steady out of habit, even though what he was making had never once weighed on him quite like this before. He mixed clay with water, the same raw materials the earth itself had been shaped from at the very beginning of everything. Slowly, a shape began to take form under his hands, the curve of a shoulder, the line of a jaw, fingers, a spine that could stand upright and walk on its own. He worked through the night. Somewhere around dawn, according to the oldest fragments of this story, he stopped to look at what he'd made, and for just a moment, the texts don't say why, they never explain the feelings of gods, only their actions. He hesitated. Maybe he already understood what he was building toward. Maybe some part of him, the part that made beautiful things for a living instead of weapons, didn't want to finish. But he did finish. Gods don't disobey Zeus over a feeling. She wasn't complete yet. Clay and water only gets you a shape, a body capable of standing and breathing. The rest of her, the parts that would actually make her her, had to come from somewhere else. So one by one, the other gods stepped forward to add what Zeus had asked of them. Athena came first. She dressed the new woman in a silver gown, and more than that, she taught her hands the kind of skill that takes most people a lifetime to earn: weaving, shaping, the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing with her fingers. Imagine that. Imagine gaining an entire skill set not through years of practice and failure, but all at once, poured into you like water into a cup. Aphrodite came next, and where Athena had given skill, Aphrodite gave a different kind of power entirely, a beauty so complete that it would stop conversations, turn heads, make people forget, for a moment, whatever they'd been thinking about before she walked into the room. The Graces followed with charm. The Horae, keepers of the seasons, wove fresh flowers into her hair, still damp with morning dew, as if to say, "You are new, you are the beginning of something. Wear these like a crown." And then came Hermes. I want you to slow down here, because this is the moment that changes everything about how you should understand the rest of this story. Hermes didn't give her a skill or a beauty or a charm you could point to and admire. He gave her a voice, persuasive, warm, the kind that could talk its way into locked rooms and closed hearts alike. And beneath that voice, quieter, harder to see, he gave her something the old text translates simply as a deceptive heart. Picture him leaning close to her, this woman who had existed for less than a day, who hadn't yet taken a single independent breath of her own thoughts. Picture whatever it looked like for a god to reach into someone and place something there, not teach it, not suggest it, install it, the way you'd fit a final piece into a mechanism that wouldn't function without it. She woke into consciousness already carrying it. A capacity for deception she never asked for, never earned, never had the chance to consent to. Built into the architecture of who she was before she'd had a single original thought. I think about that far more than the old poets ever wanted anyone to. What does it do to a person, if we can even call her that yet, in those first disoriented moments, to become aware of herself for the first time, and to somehow sense, in some wordless, pre-verbal way, that a piece of her didn't come from her at all? That someone else had reached in and left something behind, for reasons that had nothing to do with her own well-being? She didn't have the words for it yet. But I believe, if you sit with this story long enough, that some quiet, foundational part of her always knew something was off, that she was carrying a passenger inside her own mind that she hadn't invited. There's a moment I think about that isn't in any surviving text, but that I believe belongs in this story anyway, because it explains so much of what came later. I imagine Hermes returned once, not long before she was sent down to the mortal world, not to check on Zeus's plan exactly, but almost the way a craftsman circles back to inspect a piece before it leaves the workshop for good. He found her practicing her new voice, testing the words Athena's skill and Aphrodite's beauty had given her a reason to speak, and I imagine he watched her for a while before she noticed him there. "You feel it already, don't you?" he might have said, not unkindly, almost gently. In the detached way gods are gentle, with things they've built rather than things they love. She didn't know what he meant, not yet, not in words, but something in her went still at the question, the way you go still when someone names a feeling you hadn't realized you were having. "Feel what?" she might have asked him. The wanting he'd have said, "It isn't fully awake yet. It will be eventually. When it is, you won't be able to tell where you end and it begins. I'm sorry for that. I am, but I was given an order, the same as everyone else who touched you before you opened your eyes." And then, before she could ask him anything else, he was gone, the way gods so often are, arriving just long enough to unsettle everything and leaving before they have to witness the consequences of what they've said. I don't know if this conversation happened. No text confirms it. But I think something like it must have in one form or another, because how else do you explain a woman who spent months slowly, methodically coming to understand exactly what had been done to her, piece by piece, long before it was too late to matter? Zeus named her Pandora. It means all gifted, because every god on Olympus had given her something on the day she was made. It sounds like generosity, doesn't it? A woman showered with gifts from the entire pantheon, more blessed than any mortal before her. I want you to look at that word differently tonight. It was never a blessing. It was a loadout. Each god had armed her, deliberately and specifically, with exactly what she would need to succeed at a task she hadn't been told about yet. Beauty to open doors, charm to soften suspicion, skill to seem valuable. And underneath all of it, a voice and a heart built for one particular kind of moment. Zeus gave her one final gift himself before sending her down to the mortal world. A jar, sealed, heavy, unremarkable to look at, the kind of thing that could sit in the corner of a room for years without anyone giving it a second glance. Along with it, a single order: never open this. Then he sent her to a man named Epimetheus. Here is a detail that gets erased almost every single time this story gets told, and I think it might be the most important detail in the entire myth. Epimetheus was Prometheus's brother, the very man who had stolen fire and started this entire chain of consequences. And Prometheus, who understood Zeus better than almost anyone, who had just spent considerable effort outsmarting him, had warned his brother, specifically, by name, in advance, never accept a gift from Zeus. Not now, not after what I've done. Any gift that arrives now is a trap, dressed up as generosity. Epimetheus had been warned in the clearest possible terms. He took her anyway. I don't think that's a small detail you can skip past on the way to the real story. I think that detail is the real story if you're willing to actually sit inside it instead of rushing toward the ending everyone already knows. Pandora didn't choose to be built. She didn't choose to be given a hunger that wasn't hers. She didn't choose who she'd be sent to live with. And the one person positioned to protect her, the one man in this entire myth who had been explicitly, personally warned, let his guard down the moment he saw her face. Nobody in this story had less power over what happened to them than she did, not at the beginning, maybe not ever. She lived with Epimetheus for a long while before anything happened. This is the part the old myths skip over almost entirely, because myths are only interested in the moment something finally goes wrong. But I think the in-between, the ordinary, unremarkable stretch of daily life, matters more than the ending most people fixate on. Try to imagine it. Waking up every morning in a body you didn't choose, in a house that was never really yours, beside a man who had been told by name in advance not to trust whatever walked through his door. Imagine catching him sometimes, in unguarded moments, looking at you with something that wasn't quite love and wasn't quite suspicion either. Some uncertain third thing hovering in the space between the two, unable to settle on either. There would have been ordinary days. I think that's worth saying clearly, because the myth compresses everything into a single dramatic moment, and that compression erases most of what her life actually was. She likely learned the rhythms of that household, where the water was kept, which hours the light came in warmest through which windows, how Epimetheus liked his meals prepared, what made him laugh, what made him go quiet. She may have even come to care for him in whatever complicated way you can care for someone whose brother warned him against you before you'd even met. And in the corner of that house, through all of it, the jar. She didn't open it right away. I want to say that plainly, because the myth makes it sound as though she couldn't resist for more than a passing moment, as though curiosity struck her like a lightning bolt and she acted on it instantly, helplessly. The truth, as best as it can be reconstructed from the oldest fragments, is slower and far more painful than that. She lived beside that unopened jar for what may have been months, perhaps longer. She dusted around it without looking at it directly. She built small, unconscious habits around avoiding it, walking a slightly wider path around that corner of the room, keeping her hands busy with other tasks whenever she passed near it. She did, in other words, exactly what any of us would do with a locked door inside our own home. She tried to forget it was there, and mostly, for a long while, she succeeded. There's a version of this story one you won't find in any surviving text, but one I think is worth imagining anyway, where she tried to get rid of it entirely. Where one evening, while Epimetheus was away, she carried the jar down to the shoreline, intending to throw it into the sea and be done with the whole unbearable presence of it in her life. She stood at the water's edge for a long time, the jar heavy in her arms, waist reaching up toward her sandals and retreating again. She couldn't do it. Not because some invisible hand stopped her. Nothing so dramatic. She simply found, standing there, that her arms wouldn't complete the motion, that something in her recoiled from the finality of losing the jar forever, even though she couldn't have told you why, even though every conscious part of her wanted it gone. She carried it back to the house that night and set it down in exactly the same corner where it had always sat. Here is where I want to offer you something the old poets never gave her, a reason, not an excuse for what came next, a reason. Somewhere in those long, quiet months, after the failed attempt at the shoreline, after learning she couldn't simply discard the thing she feared, I believe Pandora started to understand something about herself that no one had told her outright, but that she felt the way you feel a word sitting on the tip of your tongue, just out of reach, refusing to resolve into language. She noticed how badly she wanted to know what was inside that jar, not a passing itch of curiosity, easily distracted by some other task. Something that returned to her at the exact same hour every evening when the house grew quiet and Epimetheus fell asleep and there was nothing left to keep her hands busy. A pull steady as a tide, whether she reached toward it or fought against it. And slowly, this, I think, is the true heart of this entire story. She began to suspect something about where that pull came from, that the wanting wasn't fully hers, the same way her beauty hadn't been fully hers, the same way her pussy voice hadn't been fully hers, the same way her persuasive voice hadn't been fully hers. Hermes' gift hadn't just been charm or cleverness or a talent for talking her way into rooms. It had been this, a hunger toward the one object she'd been explicitly forbidden to touch, built into her before she'd taken a single breath, so that eventually, not immediately, but eventually, inevitably, she would touch it anyway. If that's true, and emotionally I believe it has to be, then the real tragedy of Pandora was never that she was too curious for her own good. It's that she spent months, maybe longer, slowly, agonizingly realizing that she was never going to be capable of leaving that jar closed forever, that her own mind had been engineered by someone else, quietly, deliberately, toward one single unavoidable outcome, and that understanding this, seeing the trap clearly for what it was, changed absolutely nothing about whether it would eventually happen. Some cages don't need bars, some cages are built directly into the person standing inside them. I imagine the day she finally opened it wasn't dramatic. No lightning, no scream, no sudden violent loss of control, the way it's so often painted. I imagine it was quiet. Epimetheus was out, tending to something in the fields, the kind of ordinary errand that ate up an entire afternoon. The house was still in the particular way houses go still when you're the only person left inside them. Pandora sat down in front of the jar the way you'd sit down in front of a decision you'd already made, somewhere deep beneath conscious thought, long before your hands finally caught up to it. I imagine she may have said something out loud to no one in particular, to the jar itself, to Hermes, wherever he was, for whatever he'd installed inside her without asking. I know what you did to me. I know this was never really my choice to make, and I'm going to do it anyway, because at least this way it happens on my own terms, in my own time, instead of happening to me while I'm still pretending I don't already know how this ends. Then she lifted the lid. What escaped wasn't fire or roaring monsters or anything dramatic enough to fill a painting the way later artists would imagine it. The oldest texts describe them as spirits, formless, invisible, impossible to see with mortal eyes, sickness, grief, old age, envy, every hardship that would follow humanity for the rest of its existence on earth, releasing into the world in a single held breath, through a door that only she, out as every living thing that had ever existed, had been built to open. She slammed the lid shut almost immediately afterward. Too late, of course, for everything except one single thing. One spirit hadn't escaped yet. It was still there, caught at the rim of the jar when she forced the lid back down with both hands. Hope. The old sources argue endlessly about what this detail actually means, and honestly, I don't think there's a version of this story where that argument ever fully resolves. Some read it as a mercy, that hope remained behind specifically to comfort humanity through everything else that had just escaped into the world. Some read it as something far crueler than that hope stayed trapped inside the jar, useless, permanently sealed away from the exact world that needed it most, forever out of reach of the people suffering from everything else she'd released. I have my own reading of it for whatever it's worth to you tonight. I think hope stayed with her, not the world at large. Her specifically, the one thing Pandora managed to keep in the single half-second of the entire story where she had any real agency at all. A fleeting moment where the woman built entirely out of other people's intentions, other gods' calculated gifts, finally did something that was unmistakably, undeniably her own. She didn't choose to be made. She didn't choose the hunger or the jar or the household she woke up inside of. But in the brief space between the lid coming off and the lid slamming back down, she chose, deliberately, what to save. That's not nothing. I'd argue that might be the only fully uncontested thing in this entire myth that belonged to her, and her alone. Life didn't end there, though most retellings stop at exactly this point, as if the story owes nothing to what came after the disaster. Epimetheus came home that evening to find her sitting very still beside the jar, and whatever conversation passed between them that night, no text has preserved it for us. We only know what came next. They stayed together. She didn't run. He didn't send her away. Whatever complicated mixture of love, obligation, and quiet grief existed between them before that afternoon apparently survived it. They had a daughter eventually. Her name was Pera. I think about what it must have been like for Pandora, watching her own child grow up in a world that was permanently different now because of something she'd done. A world with sickness in it now, with grief and old age and envy woven into the fabric of daily life in ways it hadn't been before. I wonder if she ever told Pyrrha the whole truth. I wonder if she softened it, the way parents so often soften the hardest parts of their own history for the people they love most. I like to imagine, and this part is entirely mine to give her, since no myth ever bothered to, that Pandora eventually found a way to tell her daughter about the one thing she'd managed to save. Not as a warning, as something closer to inheritance. Everything is harder now than it used to be, she might have told her. I did that. I didn't choose to, not really, but I did it all the same, and I can't undo it. But I kept one thing back before the door closed. It's small. It doesn't fix anything on its own, but it's still here, in this house, in this family, passed down to you now, the same way everything else was passed down to me. Hold on to it. It might be the only gift in our whole family that was ever actually a gift. Here's where the story does something no one ever tells you it does. It circles back. Years later, Pia grew up, and in one of mythology's strange, deliberate echoes, she married a man named Deucalion, the son of Prometheus, the very man whose theft of fire had started this entire chain of events. Generations earlier, now bound by marriage to the daughter of the woman built to punish him for it. And not long after, Zeus, furious once again at humanity's endless capacity for cruelty toward one another, decided to end it, not with a jar this time, with a flood. Water enough to drown the entire world, every city, every field, every person who had ever benefited from the fire Prometheus stole. Deucalion and Pyrrha survived, warned in advance, some say by Prometheus himself, still watching over his son even in exile. They built a chest, sealed it, and rode out the flood inside it, the way Pandora had once lived beside a sealed vessel of her own, waiting to find out what it would cost her. When the water finally receded, they were the only two people left alive in the entire world. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think it's the actual ending this story deserves, even though almost no one tells it this way. The daughter of Pandora, the woman blamed for filling the world with hardship, became, alongside her husband, the entire reason humanity continued to exist at all. Every person born after that flood is said to descend from the two of them. Which means if you trace it back far enough, every single person alive today carries something of Pandora inside them. Not just the hardship she released, the things she saved too passed down the same bloodline, generation after generation, all the way to whoever is listening to this story right now. Maybe that's the real reason Hope stayed with her instead of escaping into the world that afternoon. Not because the world didn't need it yet, because it needed a way to survive long enough to receive it properly, through a daughter who would one day help repopulate the entire earth, carrying her mother's one uncontested choice forward into every generation that followed. So the next time someone tells you that Pandora ruined everything, that she was foolish or weak or simply too curious for her own good, I want you to remember everything we talked about tonight. A woman built, not born, armed with gifts she never asked for, including a hunger she never consented to carrying. Sent to a house she didn't choose, married to a man who had been warned about her by name before he'd ever laid eyes on her. Living for months, maybe years, beside a door she slowly, agonizingly came to understand she would never be capable of leaving closed forever. And in the end, when everything else had already slipped through her fingers and out into the world, she still found a way to hold on to one thing, small enough to fit in a jar, large enough apparently to pass down through an entire family line, generation after generation, into a world that needed it more with every year that passed. Maybe this was never a story about the first woman who ruined the world. Maybe it's a story about the first person who ever fully understood exactly what she'd been built for, and who found, in the smallest possible moment available to her, a way to make one choice that was entirely, unmistakably her own. That's tonight's story. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you tomorrow night.